Minister, the miners came here wanting a government injection of $35 million. What's your response to that?
Well, we've had this opportunity to meet with the miners and their union representatives, and the government has huge empathy and understands exactly the points that they're making about the effect that this has on families and on the communities involved. This is, however, what happens when international coal prices collapse, and what we're seeing with these decisions being made by Solid Energy is a reflection that the coal prices are really way down, and that's affected the viability and the economics of the mines and the company as a whole. And they've made these quite significant decisions which will have impacts on families and communities. But the message that the government gave today really is that there will be no one-off capital injection for the purpose of forestalling these changes that have been proposed by the board. Even if the government did put another $50 to $70 million into Solid Energy, there's no guarantee that we would not find ourselves in this position in another year's time with low coal prices and the company needing to make quite difficult decisions which have significant impacts on families and communities.
Are you considering any other intervention or support?
We're not considering any other financial support for Solid Energy. The decisions that they've made now should put the company on a greater financially viable footing. They have pretty significant impacts on families and communities, and we have full empathy with what the representatives were saying today. It is pretty significant. But the drop-off in the coal price has also been very significant, and that's the reason why the company, in order to protect its other operations and its longer-term viability, needs to have made these decisions.
So the miners walk out of your office?
Look, we listened quite intently to what they had to say, and they gave us some material to read. They presented a plan to the company previously and have had some discussions with the company on that. Certainly Mr. Ford, the chairman, has spent quite a lot of time looking at the union proposition. In the end, though, the decision is that Spring Creek, as made by the board, the decision is made that it's going to go into care and maintenance, and they're in a consultation period on that.
What was your response to their suggestion that this was because of the asset sales program?
Well, this has got nothing to do with the potential float of Solid Energy and everything to do with the collapse of international coal prices. Even if there was no plan to float shares in Solid Energy, these decisions would very well likely have had to have been made, because the economics of Spring Creek and the economics of the company are being dramatically affected by the drop-off in international coal prices, and that's why these decisions have been made. So it's got nothing to do with the fact that there is a float intended for half the shares, just under half the shares in Solid Energy. It's got everything to do with the international coal price.
If they're so low, though, can the sale even go ahead? I mean, who'd want to buy coal mine shares right now?
Well, that's a comment that is worth reflecting on. This is a 3 to 5 year sales process. It's expected that international coal prices may be up in the next 2 to 3 years. That's an opportunity for the government to look at those options then. But I think it's always been considered that Solid Energy would be at the tail end of the government's mixed ownership model program anyway.
The miners
say... Did you look at the miners' plan at all? Did you read it or consider it?
I had a copy of it. I'm not a mining expert, but what I can tell you is that Mr. Ford and the company spent quite some time considering the plans put forward by the miners and their representatives, and they've made the decisions that they have. They certainly appreciated what advice they got from the miners. In the end, though, this is being dictated to by international coal prices and the viability of the company.
So you didn't consider the plan at all because the company had already made a decision?
I had a copy of the plan that the company sent me, but in the end, this is a decision that the company makes with the expert advice that they have, and the company's board made those decisions as announced on Friday.
Given it's an operational matter, could you have intervened anyway?
Look, what ministers have been pretty clear on from day one here is to say to Solid Energy's board that this is a pretty significant decision. It has a lot of impacts, not only on the West Coast and the families involved, that the board had to be absolutely sure it was making the right decision and had to go through a process to consider that it exhausted all the options that it had. And that's what was announced yesterday, is they've gone through that review process. and they've made the decisions that they've had. The government's very clear message to the incoming chair was, if these decisions are to be made, every consideration needs to be given to other options and make sure that they are making a decision that's right.
Some other options that were being discussed 3 weeks ago regarding employment support for affected miners was involving them in the Christchurch rebuild. How have those discussions progressed? Has anything concrete come out of that?
Well, I've spoken to Mr. Ford, who's also involved in the Christchurch rebuild, and he's very keen for those authorities in Christchurch to be over onto the west coast explaining what opportunities there might be for the affected miners and their families. And I think that in the next couple of days there are expected to be some people over on the coast talking to the locals about it.
Did you raise that prospect with the miners today? What was their reaction?
Well, I think they were aware of that already, and they're considering what options there might be for people there. Of course, the purpose of their visit today was to really talk about what they wanted to talk about with respect to their jobs and the company and West Coast, and of course what comes on after that's really something that's going to develop over the next few days.
Did they give you any indication?
Well, I think we all appreciate just how difficult this decision is for the company, but also the impact on the families and the communities is significant. There's no getting away from that. 240 jobs in a place like the West Coast is very significant. And so we understand that completely. The viability of the company, though, and the other people that they employ is important. It's all being affected by the international coal price. Clearly, there are a number of options for the future on the coast, and Minister Stephen Joyce has called on the objectors to the Bathurst mine to withdraw their objection in order for that mining option to proceed apace.
Was there any talk in the meeting of miners moving to Australia?
Oh, they mentioned that a number of miners would be confronted with that decision, and I think we've known that that was a concern that many of them had. They are very skilled people, and they make a great contribution to the work that they do. And if there aren't options for them elsewhere, I'm sure that some of them will consider that.
Given the extent and speed of Solid Energy's write-downs, are you satisfied with the governance and management? I mean, we've got a new chairman at the board, but are you happy with management?
Well, look, management is a decision of accountability that the board has. I'm not able to comment on the management. What I am able to comment on is that Mr. Ford is, as the new chair, making sure that all the processes are in place to ensure that things run well at that company. Very difficult situation, gone from about $30 million of debt about 4 years ago to over $300 million today. So the company faces some significant challenges, not only in the level of debt that it's carrying, but also in the international coal price. So Mr. Ford has got a very big job there.
Have you been satisfied, though, with the economic strategies? At the end of the day, the SOE has to, if you like, a transferring profit and a dividend to the Crown. Has that SOE overextended itself via questionable business decisions?
Well, look, these decisions have been made by boards over the last few years, and they all contribute to this point. At the end of the day, though, you can't get past the drop-off in the international coal price. That's really what's driven the changes here. And we'll be continuing to look at the performance of the company's board and the performance of the company, but you can't get away from the fact that the international coal price has had a very significant impact on the operations of Solid Energy, and that's why these decisions have been made. But the government certainly understands the frustration and the disappointment of those who've worked for Solid Energy and for quite some time. This is not a decision I don't think the company would really want to make, other than the fact that coal prices dictate that the viability of the company be preserved.
The Prime Minister this morning said that Solid Energy had long expected coal prices, and that they should have basically seen it coming as the rest of the industry had. So isn't there a question there of leadership and management?
We've been talking to Solid Energy for some time about some of the base case assumptions that they've been making. A lot of this came out of a scoping study that was done earlier in the year as part of the float plan, and that did raise some questions about the assumptions around price. So we've been talking to the board around that for some time. I think we've landed in an area where there's a recognition about what the outlook was, and so these decisions are flowing out from there.
Looking back through Solid Energy's press releases over the past few years, there seems to be 2 a year at least about Spring Creek. So if Spring Creek gets closed and Spring Creek gets opened again, the economics are always described as marginal. I mean, shouldn't we have seen this coming, and doesn't that just show the ineptability of the management here around Spring Creek?
Look, it's a pretty difficult call when the price of coal drops. It changes the economics of a whole lot of stuff that might have looked sensible a few years ago, and when the cash is dropping because of the sale price, a whole lot of stuff looks a lot less sensible. As shareholding ministers, we know that we've got a responsibility to make sure that we have a company that's viable into the long term. That's why these decisions have been made. We will be assuring the public that we are closely monitoring the performance of the board, and we have a new chair in there, and Mr. Ford is also going to be making sure that a ruler is run over what happens with management and the performance of the company.
Are you looking to replace anyone else on the board due to this?
I think the board will have some additional members over the next few months, but I'll leave it at that because we haven't made any decisions with respect to those people.
But current members will be leaving the board.
I think I'd leave that for comment later on.
And also, generally, as commodity prices fall, the New Zealand dollar generally falls as well. But that hasn't happened in this case. Coal prices rise and fall, so surely that's part of the problem as well. It's not just that coal prices have fallen, because if the currency had fallen in line, then it'll all be hunky-dory still.
Yep, it's a combination of a whole lot of factors. The main thing, of course, though, is the drop-off in the international coal price. The core revenue driver has dropped significantly, and that's affected the viability of the business.
Okay.
Right, thanks very much.